Well, innovations in decentralized finance, NFTs, and DAOs have largely been confined to smart contract platforms like Ethereum. But let's take a look at our next guest who wants to bring that innovation to Bitcoin. Muneeb Ali, he's a contributor to the Stacks protocol. He's raised $150 million to build New York-based Trust Machines, which aims to build Web3 applications on Bitcoin. Joining us now there is Muneeb Ali, CEO of Trust Machines. Welcome, Muneeb.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, the narrative around Bitcoin is that it's a store of value. You buy and hold it, but you want to do more with it. How are you going to make it Web3 compatible with DeFi, NFTs, DAOs? How are you going to make that work on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I do think that this is like a big topic of discussion in the industry, that a lot of people look at Bitcoin as a very simple protocol, and it is just meant to be sound money, right? And then if you want to have smart contracts, if you want to have like these new types of applications, then you have platforms like Ethereum or some of the newer blockchains out there now, like Solana and Avalanche. Interestingly, I think if you look at Bitcoin from a technical perspective, there's nothing really stopping you from adding a separate programming layer on top of Bitcoin that actually brings the smart contract functionality to Bitcoin directly. This is the work that we did with the Stacks project that went live January of last year and has actually seen tremendous traction over the last 1 year, where people are building all sorts of Bitcoin DeFi applications. They're building Bitcoin NFTs and so on. So what we have basically seen is that I divide like the steps into three. The number one step is the digital gold narrative, that Bitcoin is a store of value. And we are seeing that play out. Like, institutional investors are adopting it, even nation states are adopting it. The next step is going to be turning Bitcoin into a productive asset, right? So right now, most of the Bitcoin actually sits passively, like more than 99% of Bitcoin sits passively, and you can start deploying it actively into smart contracts, like how we've seen on Ethereum, where between 20 to 25% of the capital is actively deployed. People can get yields on it. And I think that's a massive opportunity, right? That Bitcoin, even with the markets coming down, Bitcoin is still like a $800, $900 billion capital base, which is basically right now being underutilized. And just making it productive through smart contracts is a massive opportunity. And then step three is what you brought up. The Bitcoin is not just kind of like sound money. The infrastructure of Bitcoin, the decentralized secure layer that's already out there, can actually serve as a settlement layer for Web3 applications, because it's all about trust. It's all about a decentralization. And there's no other blockchain that even comes close to the level of decentralization that Bitcoin has. So we can add the missing features as separate layers on top, and then use Bitcoin as the final settlement layer for Web3 applications. And I think that's going to be a major, major unlock.
So, Muneeb, when we look at the current structure of the marketplace right now in DeFi, wrapped Bitcoin doesn't necessarily have as big of a market. It doesn't have a market share the size of, let's say, ETH when it comes to DeFi as collateral. It's as total locked. And how do you get the DeFi traders to pay more attention to Bitcoin, and vice versa? How do you get the Bitcoin maxis to pay more attention to DeFi? Well, there seems to be this cultural difference in mentalities for people who are involved in Bitcoin and people who are involved in DeFi. How do you bridge that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the first thing about that people should understand about wrapped assets is that most of these wrapped assets introduce central points of failure, and those are big limitations, right? So let's look at a wrapped BTC on Ethereum. You're actually trusting a company in the middle that is issuing a new asset on a different blockchain. So what happens is that it puts a natural limit on how much of that capital can be deployed. Like maybe it's like 5 billion, 10 billion. But at some point, if the numbers start becoming really big, like 100 billion, 200 billion, like people would start feeling very uneasy about that single point of failure in the middle. And I think that's the fundamental thing that we are changing, and which we have seen to work really well on Ethereum, because Ethereum, when people are deploying ETH into smart contracts, there's no central company in the middle. Like I, as a user, could just use my wallet and deploy ETH directly into smart contracts. So once you bring that functionality to Bitcoin, where as a Bitcoiner, just using a Bitcoin wallet, you can do a normal transaction, and you're actually, let's say, putting up collateral for a stablecoin, and you're minting stablecoin against your BDC. So now there are no kind of like central points of failure in the middle, and that's where you really unlock the capital. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing about the cultural aspect, I do think that in the Bitcoin community, especially like after 2017, there is this culture of almost like rejecting new ideas, and I think there are good things to it and bad things to it. Like for example, Bitcoin does have a very high bar for quality in terms of any changes, any new things, any new code features that can be introduced to the Bitcoin code base. And I think that's actually a very, very important thing, and it's a very good thing to have. On the flip side, I think sometimes this culture also comes across as you're just going to reject new ideas. But I do think that a lot of that is changing. Like in my interactions, what I've seen is that some of the people who on the spectrum are more on the maximalist side, they might be the more loud voices, but they're actually the minority, right? Most people who actually own Bitcoin hold other assets as well. And in our community over the last 1 year, we've actually seen a massive increase in the number of people who are Bitcoiners, who are really excited about putting their Bitcoin capital to work, and they want to use decentralized applications that are built on top of Bitcoin.
So Muneeb, just to kind of follow up on that point, it's funny because you're saying like there's so much opportunity here, and it's almost like such the obvious opportunity in the sense that Bitcoin is clearly the first mover in this space, and yet nobody's really doing this at scale except for you and your team, right? So I guess the question is like why is that? Why has it taken so long for people to be like, oh yeah, DeFi is applicable to Bitcoin too, smart contracts are applicable to Bitcoin too? I mean, you should have mentioned maybe part of it has to do with like resistance to change or having a higher standard, but what have been the main obstacles thus far in preventing people from seeing the same opportunity that you're seeing now?
I think the number one challenge has been technical reasons, right? So if you look at how Bitcoin is structured, Bitcoin does not have smart contracts at the base layer, right? Some Bitcoiners would try to argue with you that even the limited script that Bitcoin has, even those are smart contracts. But developers don't think of them as smart contracts at all, right? They're extremely limited. And some of the other solutions that we've seen over the last 10 years are also very, very limited type of smart contracts. So the biggest technical hurdle was how do you introduce fully expressive smart contracts, like the kind of programming languages that exist on Ethereum, on Solana, and other blockchains where developers can build whatever that they want to build. If you want to build a decentralized exchange, you should be able to do that, right? How do you introduce that type of expressive programming languages without modifying Bitcoin? And I think that was a very hard technical challenge. And that's the technical challenge that me and a bunch of computer scientists that I've worked with, they cracked over the last few years, where there's a new type of a consensus mechanism. It's very different from proof of stake and proof of work and other things that people have seen. It's basically cross-chain consensus. Right. So what it does is it adds a new programming layer to Bitcoin with requiring zero changes to Bitcoin. Like we do not require any changes to Bitcoin whatsoever. And it connects to Bitcoin. It has a cross-chain consensus with Bitcoin. And then the smart contracts can actually read all the information from normal Bitcoin transactions. They can respond to it, and you can get smart contract functionality. So I would say the number one thing was the technical challenges that were there, which only got cracked like last year. And I completely agree with you that this is one of those things that in hindsight, it's going to look like the most obvious thing. Bitcoin is by far the biggest cryptocurrency, the biggest brand name, the biggest community. And I think it's going to look like, hey, obviously people are going to build interesting things on top of Bitcoin. Obviously they were going to build DeFi on top of Bitcoin. It's the best form of money.
So many 5 years from now, of course, we all wish we had a crystal ball, but and we might have long-term plans, but of course it ends up being short-term. But 5 years from now, if what you think will happen, we've seen the rise of these, we've seen the rise of the altcoins over the past year. The layer ones just explode over the past year. Do you think over the next couple of years, if not 5 years, that will continue? Do you think Bitcoin can reclaim, let's say, market share, if you will, from them? Or do you think it's going to be an ecosystem where Bitcoin will be not an also-ran, but just one among many?
Yes, so I think the way I look at this is I've been a believer in a multi-chain world for smart contracts. And even if you go back like 9 months, there were a lot of kind of like theories and narratives in the industry that no, Ethereum is like so far ahead that other smart contract platforms are not going to take off. And we've clearly seen that being invalidated with the rise of Solana, with the rise of Avalanche and Algorand, other platforms out there. And they're seeing real traction, right? They're seeing real developers coming in, a lot of users are coming in and actually using these networks. So we have already seen that play out. The second thesis that I deeply believe in, maybe even more than a multi-chain world, is that Bitcoin is going to be the center of gravity for crypto. Because as soon as you can do the type of things you can do on Ethereum, like really easily on top of Bitcoin, like that is the biggest differentiator. Because why would a new developer go anywhere else when they already got introduced to crypto through Bitcoin? When on one side, you're seeing $1 trillion of capital on a secure base, and you can just start working on it straight away as easily as you could on a smaller ecosystem. So I do think that there would be network effects where Bitcoin would basically pull a lot of these use cases towards Bitcoin. And I think that's going to be very, very interesting. Obviously, this is a thesis that we very deeply believe in. We have seen enough data in the market over the last 1 year. And I think a lot of our investors agree with it. So one of the funds that invested in us is Briar Capital, which is Jim Briar, who actually led the first institutional round at Facebook. Right? So the type of people who kind of like were early believers in even things like Facebook believe in this Bitcoin thesis, right? They're not saying that, hey, smart contracts are going to be big. What they're saying is smart contracts on Bitcoin are going to be the thing that's going to be really big 5 to 10 years from now. And if you look at the data, like Ethereum is like roughly $500 billion of a network value, but there are $500 billion of application built on top. If you look at Bitcoin, like this is such an obvious opportunity. It's $1 trillion of network value, but very little applications built on top. In the long run, I just don't see a world where it stays that way. I think there's going to be a ton of value created on top of Bitcoin.
So Muneeb, are you going to be building Web3 tools on Stacks? Okay, on Stacks versus Rootstock or RSK. And how is that different from your company Hero? Because Hero was also developing tools for on top of Stacks. And I guess another thing I wanted to talk about was, is there a white paper for Stacks that people kind of understand more about the technical aspects of it?
Yeah, so I think Stacks is a open source project. It's a decentralized programming layer for Bitcoin. So I think just like Bitcoin is decentralized, obviously nothing can be as decentralized as Bitcoin itself. But if you look at the Stacks project, it is very decentralized relative to other crypto projects out there. There's no single big company that is behind it. And sometimes that actually leads to confusion, interestingly, because people are so used to having a big company behind a project that they confuse the company with the project itself. So Hero is a developer tooling company. It's in the business of building really amazing developer tools for developers. And the new company that I've started, Trust Machines, is more focused on building applications and contributing to the underlying platform technologies. Right? So the way to think about this is Stacks is decentralized. It's a programming layer. It's an open source project. And now there are 30 plus other companies, Hero and Trust Machines being two of them, that are all kind of like contributing to this, and they want to make Web3 happen on top of Bitcoin.